Hey guys, I'll be presenting on this blockchain application in healthcare called MedRec, and it's currently a case study. So first of all, this is a white paper. It's a collaborative white paper by MIT Media Lab and the Harvard Medical School, and they're just finding ways how you can apply blockchain to make how information moves within the healthcare industry more effective, because so many costs and inefficiencies are in that system right now. And the reason why I chose this paper, well, I'm a third year studying here for, you guessed it, I want to be a doctor because I'm Asian. But I mean, one day I really want to make or push how information moves in the health industry forward, because it's, as I said, a complete mess. So today, here's like a brief time overview of what I'll be talking about. So first, it's really important that we understand the problems in the healthcare industry. Second, after understanding those problems, I'll talk about what a step forward would be. And then third, after that, is how MedRec, what the white paper is about, will address those problems. Then we'll evaluate it and look at it, how it's implemented. And all of this I'll be talking about at a very high level. This type of technology I'm pretty new to. But I think this is pretty understandable, but definitely like throughout the presentation, hit me with questions or clarifications, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, so first we'll talk about the story of how a mess happened in healthcare. Okay, so first of all, within like the system of health information, when it comes to data, who do you guys think are like the, I guess, key stakeholders? There's about like 3 or 4 of them. Yeah.
Insurance agencies,
Okay.
Primary care providers,
Yes.
And large hospitals.
All right, cool. So let's group primary care providers and hospitals together as practitioners. Okay, so people who like take care of you.
Sure.
Right, in the back.
The processing centers that doctors send all the insurance stuff to.
Exactly. So and also like you're talking about where doctors send like all their patient data, right, and stuff like that. Yeah. EHRs. Okay, perfect. That's pretty much all of them. So glad we got that taken care of. So we have practitioners, patients, insurance, third parties, and then the EHRs, the providers. Okay, so these are the key players. Now we can like group them into 2 camps. There are people or entities that produce the data. So patients, essentially the whole system is geared towards serving their patients. So then it's essentially like built on all of the patient's data. And then the other camp are the people who like manage the data. So data providers, let's call them that, EHRs. They'll be taking care of all the data because, I mean, yeah, doctors are smart. They're not smart enough to like organize data or like keep it efficient. So then companies step in to take care of that for them. So there's segmentation there. So here's like a pretty gnarly flow map of how data and money moves within the context of what we're talking about, these 4 parties. As you can see, like it's already like kind of a clusterfuck in a way. It's hard to like figure out who actually like holds the power for certain things. But then if I were to like walk you through this for like a very basic example, let's say I'm sick, right? It's very simple. I'm going to go to my doctor. So my practitioner will provide me a service, right? Well, when I'm visiting my doctor, they get my data. Okay, cholesterol levels, heart rate, whatever. So they'll have that data. But then today, I don't exactly like pay the practitioners directly. I pay them through payment providers, so insurance. So the money goes this way and then up to them. Okay, cool. And they're providing me a service because they're taking care of any charges if like I essentially meet my deductible. So then now, once the doctors have their money, they also give some money to the data providers because they're managing essentially the centers like data, and that's a service for them. And also money comes from third parties and like insurance companies to data providers to like get a hold of that data, because insurance companies of course need to know like what sort of treatments you're getting so that they could like optimize their policies to make the most money off you, right? Okay, so if, like very crudely, too many arrows this way, data providers, for the most part, hold a fair amount, like a good amount of power within this whole system. And intuitively, if you think about where doctors will be 10 years from now, because data is so important in like improving how treatments work, getting a good understanding of how to prevent diseases, illnesses, and all that, the ones who hold the data, they're the ones in power right now. Okay, so obviously any system in any industry, the system's put in place for a certain mission, and for healthcare, it's of course to make sure that everyone is as healthy as possible, and we want to make it so that it's affordable and accessible to everyone in the world. And so now we're gonna look at how the current system. We're gonna look at where all the problems come from in the current system. So again, if we take the simple example where the everyday person goes to the doctor, we're gonna go to our practitioner, right? Our average life expectancy is about 80 years old. So throughout your lifetime, you're probably gonna go through at least, let's say, 3 healthcare providers. I mean, we're in the Bay Area right now. Some of us will probably move to the East Coast, if not internationally. We'll have different healthcare providers throughout the stages of our life. So what are the implications of that? Well, because we have different healthcare providers, we're essentially, and I'll talk about this more later on, we're essentially like fragmenting all our personal health records across think of them as databases. Because if you go to different providers will likely be using different data providers too. So now you can see this as like there's segmentation going on. So if I do something like this, let's call this time axis. This is like number of providers you go through in life. So early on, it's pretty like low, like 1 to like 3, if anything. But then as you like move around in life, this is going to increase and increase some more. Well, at each point, let's call this one of your providers. They can actually be linked up with 3 different data providers, okay? So think of it as 3 different databases. Your information might go to 1, 2, or all 3 of those databases. Now, I hope you guys can see like how this can become a problem. Because over time, your data is fragmented across a lot of databases, and it's hard to like collect all of your data whenever you need it. So then we, like the average person, like doesn't have that much like agency over our own like health information, which is that kind of sucks, right? I mean, like how many of you can actually legitimately pull up an app or like say like how many vaccines you've had in your life, how many doctor visits you've had in your life, right? It's something like we've just taken for granted, and that's because we're not really aware of our own information. There's no way that we can like quickly pull up our own information. And as I said, because they're spread out across different data providers, each data provider has different ways of managing data. And even though the healthcare industry says that there are standard protocols to like managing that information, the protocols are like so loose that like each provider can like come up with their own implementation of it. Schemas are different, and like there's really at the end of the day, there's no standardization to like how this is all managed. So it's really hard for interoperability purposes. So as I said, your health information is fragmented across a bunch of databases essentially. And another problem is HIPAA compliance. I mean, it's pretty simple. Like it's sensitive. Your health information is like very sensitive. It should be private. So the problem that comes out of this is that whenever, let's say you went to your doctor, very like Mickey Mouse example, but like you weigh 120 pounds. For some reason, they overweight you and you're 220 off by 100, okay? But they had already sent that you weighed 220 pounds to Cerner's databases. Well, because of HIPAA, the doctor's going to be like, okay, wait, I messed up. He's actually 120 pounds. Send that over to Cerner. Cerner might take up to 60 days to actually recognize that the doctor messed up. And essentially what happens is that database is out of sync with real time. What happens then? That delays the payment timeline. Because now insurance companies, whoever's going to pay the doctors, they don't really know, like, let's say you got treated today, that treatment might not show up in the actual databases until a month. That's why like your insurance bill sometimes like comes so late in time. So the payment system is also delayed and pushed forward. And I know it's like really hard to read, but it's made it that way so that all these problems stack up. Hope it makes your head hurt because this is what the healthcare information system is. So now, as I said, patients don't have agency. They don't have a holistic view of like all their health records. So now, what's like the ultimate problem of this? If I'm not that aware of my own like health information, I like me personally, just because like this is the system like we've all been raised in. I personally feel like I don't have that much of a connection to my own like health information. I don't really know too much about the health system that manages it. I kind of have distrust in it. I mean, I just want to go to the doctor and get treated. That's all I want to do. But I have no idea or like no knowledge of like my own health information, or at least it would take me a lot of effort to like get any of that. So now it's hard to provide good health care when like none of like the people who you're trying to serve are really aware of like their own problems. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, the system was built for the purpose of making healthcare efficient, affordable, etc. But because of the way how the system is managing the data, and because of how data is going to be so important in the future of healthcare, the system today actually undermines the entire purpose, and that's why it needs to be changed. Okay, so what do we need? What's it relying on? Well, if we reevaluate healthcare's mission, I took this off of like some government website. Want to maximize preventive medicine. If you maximize preventing illnesses and diseases, you actually minimize the amount of costs that arise from treatments because pretty much preventive medicine is like the most expensive thing in the entire system. And that requires like years of research, years of like funding for research, and what's needed for research is of course data. And then you want to make healthcare affordable and accessible. How can you do that when managing the data is so expensive, right? It's expensive to build exchange systems or management systems that have to comply with HIPAA, that have to like follow certain protocols. Like the person who actually, or at least the entities that actually build these systems, so like health IT experts and all that, they can like charge whatever they want. Well, not whatever they want, but like really high prices to like build these systems because like they're the ones with the knowledge how to build this. Improve safety and quality of care. That requires a lot of feedback over time. Of course, data too. And then finding new methods of treatment, that's pretty much the same as point one. You need like aggregate data over time so you can spot trends and like prevent diseases and that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's pretty obvious. I bolded data. You need information, as in like any other sector, to truly like keep up with things and push things forward. But then in healthcare, it's so like poorly managed that it's actually pushing them backwards even. Okay, so in total, we need a system that is interoperable, frictionless, so anyone can like just access data easily while being like compliant with privacy regulations, secure of course, and then implementable. Implementable, by that I mean you can't just really walk into the healthcare industry as you can with like any other industry. You can't just walk in and like change it overnight, over the course of a year or whatever. It's going to take a lot of time. So by implementable, I mean something that can be adopted today, and over time it'll like bring about change. Because like the healthcare industry itself, it's like so big, it's occupied by giants at this point. You can't really just move it really quickly, right? It's like trying to move an immovable object in like a short amount of time. No, that's going to take a lot of time to like really break down the problem and slowly converge it towards a better point. So yeah, sorry, old meme. But
Old meme, dank meme.
thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, great. Okay, cool. So let's talk about MedRec. Finally, we can talk about the actual white paper. So MedRec is essentially built on Ethereum's like smart contract. So that's the actual blockchain, and essentially like at a very high level, what they're trying to do is use that blockchain as a data structure to store all the information about permissions, basically. So they're using blockchain to, as I said, store permissions, and essentially the main thing they're solving is the privacy issue. And by that I mean now instead of taking like up to 60 days to really know that an action was made, now it can like take a minute, if not seconds. So using like Ethereum's technology, they can pretty much ensure authentication, confidentiality, accountability, and data sharing. And by data sharing, I mean just you can now, even though all the different data providers are like separate entities, you can still, given permissions, you can still retrieve information across them pretty easily, or at least more easily than we can today, if we can at all today. So this is like a lot of text, but basically it essentially, one, still complies to HIPAA, and that's why it can like be put into works like today even. It can integrate with legacy systems and pretty much gradually make change to the system over time. Provides interoperability between databases, which is great. One of the most important things is that now, if let's say in a world where MedRec exists, it really empowers patients to take control of their data, their own personal health information, because now essentially what you have is each, and I'll go into some more of this, like the next slide, I think. Now patients essentially they have like a whole comprehensive log of everything that's been happening to their health data over time, and that gives you like visits to the doctor, or like even like your own data moving from EHR to EHR. And so now you can be aware of your own information, which is really crucial. Okay, so this is essentially one of the figures in the white paper. This is their organization of how they're using Ethereum. It's the easiest way to do this. So essentially you can think about these as like dictionaries or like hash maps. At the most basic level, everyone's like has their real world identity, right? Like my name's Steven, there's Bob, Jane, etc. And everyone has, it's linked to their Ethereum address basically. So cool. That's like, think of it as your ID card to the system. So now from there, you can jump to your what's called a summary contract. That's just another dictionary essentially. So now think of this as you. This is your summary contract. And what is in the summary contract is essentially a bunch of pointers to your relationship with another entity. So let's say, in this case, if you're patient A, you would go here, you would find out that here's your summary contract within this whole scheme. And you want to see your relationship with provider B. Provider B has a database that contains all your data. So now you're going to go to that patient-provider relationship, essentially. Think of it as like as an edge in a graph, one-way edge. So you're going to look at yours with provider B. Provider B is you're the owner of this PPR, but then provider B actually holds your data. And how you essentially query your data is this has what they call like an EMR query, but essentially think of it as like a key to that database. and you can use that key, attach like whatever you're searching for. Let's say I'm searching for like my weight in 2002, for like a very simple example. You would send the query to provider B, and then they'd retrieve it for you, and you'd get it. And the next slide will actually show you how that works from end to end. Yeah.
I think you may address this, but what happens if provider B just disappears?
If provider B just disappears, that's a good question. In that case, so their databases would disappear, and you wouldn't be able to retrieve your own information. Yeah, I honestly don't know.
But that's still an issue now, right? Like the database is right.
Yeah, like today, anyone can be like hacked, right? Several like health databases have been like held for ransom. Yeah.
So the actual data is always stored in these databases. I mean, would it be in the future maybe the idea to bring it all on the blockchain? I guess.
Yeah, so that's ideally what could happen, but the problem with that is like health data is like so big, like can a whole network withstand that? If it can, great. But right now I'm not sure if that's the case yet, and the paper does talk about that, like they're not sure if that's the case yet, so then they're gonna hold back on that for now. Yes.
You said health data is big.
Yeah, in the sense like, I mean if
Just records, right? How big is the record?
it's in the sense like you'll have to like hold all that information in a record. Like will you have enough like nodes in the system to like withstand that?
Well, are they larger than like some of these contracts that Ethereum is supposedly hosting?
I see. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question. I'm not like too well versed with like the contracts, but at a high level.
There's probably a lot more people in smart contracts. Just as a guess.
That's debatable. One entity might have several contracts, but that's a different topic.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, I'm just gonna point out, as my dad's actually vetted in medical stuff.
Okay.
Not all, while your primary care, that's true. Not all data is in these data providers. Like
Okay.
for example, surgeries to see if you did well or not.
Right.
It's probably at the hospital itself.
Okay. So then the hospitals will have their own like essentially
Yeah,
data
so
stores.
It's a lot more scattered than you might think, depending on what type of health data you want.
Right. So then it's even more scattered, which
Yeah.
makes this even better, right? Okay, great. But that's like really good to know. Thanks. Okay, so this is like a brief demo. This is in the case like say you just visited your doctor. They updated like one of your like health points. So they're gonna update the record. Consider that adding a record to whatever data store they're using. So be it like the actual hospital stores or like a data provider. That's gonna go to, and within this like system, each node that's a part of the MedRec system like has like a similar, pretty much similar components. They just pretty much trigger differently depending on the context. So it would first go to the EHR manager, and what would happen is the provider wants to update its database. But because you want like whoever your constituents are to be like always aware that aware of like how their data is being moved, what happens is they're gonna send out like or actually here's a better way of doing it. They're trying to update their database. Between this provider and the patient, there was a PPR, right? So let's say it's patient B, A and provider B. So then provider B, who's trying to update their database, is gonna pretty much change the status to like a 1 to say that that something's gonna change. So given that that's changed, that's gonna propagate through the smart contract network, and essentially that's gonna be put onto a block. The miner here, and I'll go into more depth about this later, but they're essentially gonna do what's typically done to essentially put another block in, and their bounty is actually anonymized health data that's being updated, or it can be something else. But just think of the bounty instead of like a currency. Now that like piece of value is health information that's been anonymized. And that's especially valuable for researchers, right? So now that incentivizes researchers and whoever wants like health data that couldn't get their hands on it to bring in their like computing resources, so like whatever servers to like mine the blockchain and make it work. So now that it's on the block, it's going to propagate through the network, and now you're going to get it. It's going to say that your summary contract was updated. You're going to get that notification here. And you can choose to like reject or approve it. And depending on what you choose, that's going to go back through the network. So it's going to update the PPR between you and that provider again. So now the provider will get the notification. And then if it's like accepted, then it's going to update the database. If not, then it's not going to update. Now, because like you want the state to be updated across all your nodes in the system, what happens is, like let's say it like approves this update, it's also going to send like a query to the provider to say, okay, what's the current state of my data now, right? So it can like update their own database. If that's going to be sent at the same time, this is updated, then this goes through. It's going to check, because permissions were on the blockchain, it's going to check if you are who you really say you are and that you have permissions to retrieve data from this database. So think of this guy as like the security guard. If everything goes through, then it's good. Query's going to come back, and you'll have an update. It's going to update your database too. So now, if like imagine like this is happening across the entire network, every node should ideally have the same like updated track record of like your own personal information. Any questions? Okay. So takeaways. We're going to evaluate it. So progress being made. So now, because your database is like your own, I guess, store of your own information is always consistently updated, like this can be almost in real time. You no longer have that like 30 to 60 day delay of like not knowing what happened. And so now you have like more awareness of like what's happening in your, when it comes to like your own health and data. So now, because of that, just think of like apps that can run on this system. You essentially can manage your own health information as you do like with social media or like your own finances, right? There's apps to like manage that. You can do that here now, ideally. So another thing is that because you can grant permissions here, whenever you're looking at a PPR, there's permissions to check if the person trying to retrieve data is actually like authorized to like get the data. So because of that, you can actually have interoperability in the sense that whoever has permissions to view your data that like you gave the permission to can retrieve it pretty quickly, and instead of like having to wait another like long period of time to like acknowledge that you sent a request and then like maybe like not even have the request approved. So now because there's like some sort of like structure as to how information should move within like the context of MedRec, costs should be reduced in terms of like managing information transfer, because like today you can think of it as people in like HR at like data provider companies and healthcare providers. They're always like talking to each other to make sure that like data's in sync and all that. If you have this in place, it's pretty much like all taken care of by computers. You can essentially cut the cost there by having to like have people do it for you. And as I said, so when it came to miners that actually make the system work, they're incentivized with anonymized health information. So that becomes a value. In the paper, they talk about how this like brings up the idea of like a data economy, in the sense that all this runs on top of the value of information that you can't normally get, and because it's anonymized. So now government, researchers, whoever wants this like information, they can jump into the network and get it and that helps the network like run. So now some questions I had at the end of the paper, and like some problems that like are that I thought were unaddressed by MedRec is that so what if like none of like the data providers actually decide to adopt MedRec, because like I mean profits are being made off of like inefficiencies within the system. So maybe there might be like economic incentives to like not take part in MedRec. Maybe you guys can like think of some ideas as to like why they might not adopt it. Another question I had was like, okay, cool. So now you have more control of your own health information, and you're the one who decides who gets to hold your information. So like how does power get redistributed within the ecosystem we looked at within like the first few slides? So now when I say information ideally is like more decentralized in the context of this paper, I mean that in the paper they talked about how data will be like spread across like local nodes. So in the sense, today a data provider could be storing like multiple clinics health information on one node. Anyone who hacks that can like pretty much find out what several clinics have to hold. Instead now, you can, what they're talking about is you can have like say a node for every clinic. So now it's more spread out, so then they'll have to like take care of 5 nodes to actually get the same amount of information. So now that it's like more spread out in that sense, the problem still remains that like these data providers have to ensure that their own systems are secure against like attacks, right? Like let's say there's 5 of them, 3 of them don't do like a really good job of like securing their own stores. I mean, then the network's like pretty much fried. Like anyone can hit it in that sense if people don't really try to maintain the security. So what would like the best practices be to make sure that these things hold? And then in the system, like you're passing anonymous health data around. Sure, it's like anonymous, but like you can still, I guess, infer by like frequency analysis, data forensics, that kind of stuff, who the person is behind like this anonymous data. And this idea of like a data economy, like how will that like spread in the world? Like will it come across in different industries, and like how will like the value of data to like, I guess, real money today, like how would that relationship change? Like I'm sure there would be like higher liquidity for like the data. So yeah, that's pretty much all of MedRec. So questions? Yeah.
So there's just a lot of research done on this. But you said there hasn't been implementation yet. It's mostly for researchers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They did implement something, but it's only like within their like own system. So like they're using was like Beth Israel Deaconess Center. That's like Harvard's like training hospital, right? They're pairing that with like their own data stores and like trying to see if that would work within like their own like pool of people who are like actually trying to see if it works. But like overall, I don't really know. I'm sure like there are companies trying to like make this happen, but I'm not sure like how far they are or like where this like idea is in the process of it becoming something. You had a question.
I'm just going to point out another problem with the data sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to think of other applications, but there's not as much incentive to mine because you can freely copy and share the data.
Right.
And especially your research, you'll probably share it with your colleagues. Or you might just sell for a little.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So
You're basically trying to, at that point, you might as well just try to replace the data providers.
yeah. Okay. I'll think about it.
Wait, but then won't you still be in like violation of normal HIPAA laws?
For sharing anonymous data, there's
Oh, I know.
Yeah. It would be
anonymized.
Right.
well, it'd pretty much be like sharing movies.
They already sell anonymized data.
I mean, I was just kind of gonna add to that. Like, at what point does this data economy like fail to incentivize miners? Like
Mhm.
in the future, once like
there's
data is
enough data out
widespread,
there. Yeah.
like how do we maintain the blockchain? That's just something I would be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, ideally by then, yeah, that's true. Like the original like incentive for miners won't be there, right? But then like assuming like the system becomes efficient enough to like cut the rest of the other costs, like if enough incentive is there, maybe there'd be like resources there to like preserve like the efficiency of the system. Right. Any other questions? All right. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Good job.
Thanks.